Okay, so I know the ongoing theme here on this channel is me complaining how I don't read enough books. But, I was looking back at the books I've read this year and realized there might be enough for a little tricky wrap-up video. So let's do that, shall we? Hello, welcome. I'm Kat, and today I thought I'd go through some of the books I've read this year. Okay, this is probably going to be 2022 and some of 2021 as well, because for the life of me, I just can't remember which books I read when. These 2 years just blended together into one big mush in my brain, and I cannot differentiate them at all. Also, these are not in any particular order. It's not the order I've read them in because, again, I can't remember what order I read them in. So let's start with one of the more recent ones that I've read, Radio Silence by Alice Osman. This is a contemporary YA, which is not something I usually read. I'm not sure why I picked it up, to be honest. I think one of the booktubers I follow kept going on about how great this book is. So I gave it a go, and I actually quite enjoyed it. This is a book about two teenagers who are about to finish high school as they become fast friends and they make a mystery podcast together, while they also try to keep up with their studies and meet the expectations of the people around them. It's a pretty simple premise, but the characters are nicely done, and it kept me interested from start to finish. So, even though I am definitely not the target audience for this book, I had a lot of fun reading it. Next is Project Hail Mary by Anthony Weir. He's the guy who wrote The Martian, that I really like, and also Artemis, that I haven't read since the reviews were kind of lackluster. And this is his third book. So I really enjoyed this book. It just has all the tropes that I really like in sci-fi, which I'm not going to elaborate on since that would be spoilers. The main protagonist is really similar to the one in The Martians, but I really didn't mind that. That's one of the things I enjoyed in The Martian. And it was one of those books I just couldn't put down, which is pretty rare for me nowadays. It feels like almost every book I pick up, I would inevitably get stuck in the middle somewhere and then I would have to push myself to read it. But this one I just finished in a couple of sittings. So yeah, I really liked it. Another book I've read is Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention by Johan Hari. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Whatever. So, this is a nonfiction book that my friend got me because I mentioned wanting to read it. I've just been having a lot of trouble focusing in the last couple of years, ever since the pandemonium started. So, the title of the book just spoke to me. Basically, the premise of this book is that our collective attention span is shrinking. And the author book lays down various reasons and talks to various experts on the subject. I quite liked this book, though at times it did feel more like a summary of a bigger book, because there's just a lot of little snippets of interviews and little starts of ideas without like further elaboration. But I guess when you're trying to talk about so many different reasons, there's a limit on how much you can explore each one within the span of a single book. But yeah, it was really interesting. I think the author actually provides a whole bunch of like full interviews with the experts that he spoke with on his website. So I think I might check it out at some point. But yeah, that was just like a really interesting book. Next, I read Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. I read it as part of a book club I'm in. This is the first of the Discworld novels, and also this is the first book by Terry Pratchett that I've read. Well, not exactly. I have read another book by him, but I was in high school and I have very vague memories from that book. So I think it's like the first conscious reading of Terry Pratchett. So this is like a comedic fantasy novel that takes place in a world that is basically flat, and it stands on the backs of elephants that are standing on a turtle flying through space. And we follow this magician who serves as a tour guide to this naive insurance clerk from a different part of the world. And I'll be honest, like I knew this was supposed to be like a funny fantasy book, and it was quite humorous, but it also felt very disjointed and a little bit uneven. Like this feels like a collection of three novellas rather than one cohesive book. And some parts were more interesting than the others. I did have fun with this book, but There were a few sections where I found myself getting a bit bored. Still, the world was interesting and unique, and it was quite funny in places, not like witty dialogue, laugh out loud funny, more like the world building is deliberately nonsensical, but in a good way. Basically, I don't think I want to read this specific book again in the future, but I definitely want to check more of the Discworld books. Another book I've read is Jade City by Fonda Lee, which was another book club book choice. This is a book set in a fictional city of Janloon, which is like a fantasy analog of mid 20th century Hong Kong. And in this world, Jade, the stone, has magic properties that some people can use to get stronger. And the whole book is about these two competing mafia families who use Jade. And like the premise actually sounds really interesting, but reading this, I realized that I just don't like mafia stories. You know how sometimes you're just not a fan of a particular story element, and it doesn't mean it's a bad story element. It's just not your vibe. And yeah, apparently a mafia-centered plot is just not my cup of tea. I didn't particularly like any of the characters, and in general, this book just did not click with me. I'm not saying it's a bad book. I know there are people who absolutely love it, but it is just not for me. This is actually a first book of a trilogy, but I am not going to be continuing with the rest. Next, I have also read the first three books of the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, which are The Eye of the World, The Great Hunt, and Dragon Reborn, all of which I actually really enjoyed. It took me a while to get into the first book. It does have a bit of a slow start, but I listened to it as an audiobook and it was really, really nice. The narrators for that specific audiobook are actually really good. I've really enjoyed the world and the characters, although I'll be honest, if I was reading it and not listening, I might have lost patience a little bit. It is very slow in places, but the first three books are really great to listen to. I also realized that when well done, I really like a Chosen One story, which is, I know, kind of lame. Chosen One is the most overused trope in existence, but still, I just like that sense of dread that comes with a Chosen One story. I also started the fourth book, The Shadow Rising, but I couldn't get into it. One of the characters I really like just took a turn into a super boring territory, so my brain just went, okay, I've had enough of this now. I'm still planning to finish the series sometime in the future, but it might take a while. Okay, next I've read Rivers of London and Moon Over Soho by Ben Arnovich. These are the first two books of his magic crime novels, and they follow a young police officer in present day London who discovers that there's magic and supernatural in the world and has to investigate a series of like supernatural murders. A pretty standard premise, but I still enjoyed these two books a lot. Again, these are just plot elements I enjoy. I like urban fantasy, stories about the supernatural, I like detective novels, so the mix of all of it is just right up my alley. Then I've read Citizen of the Galaxy by Robert Heinlein. I did a little review of this book, so I'm not gonna elaborate too much, but it was an okay book. Then I have also read Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson. So it came out late last year, meaning 2021. So I think I've read it at the start of this year, 2022, but I might be wrong. So this is the third book in the Skyward series, and it breaks my heart to say that this book sucks. I was so sad that I didn't like it because Skyward, the first book, was just so good. Anyway, I want to make a separate video on this book, so I'm not gonna say too much more than this, but this was just like a really big disappointment for me. I've also read Access by Robert Charles Wilson. This is a sequel to Spin, a book that I really enjoyed a few years back. It is a sci-fi about how the stars suddenly disappeared one day and how humanity copes with that. And it goes into some really interesting directions. Access continues the story of Spin, but then it gets even weirder. It was an interesting read, but I'll be honest, I'm not sure how much I liked it. It was unique, I guess. I started reading the third book, Vortex, but that one just went completely off the rails, so I couldn't really get into it. There were also a few books that I started and did not finish for various reasons, so I might just do a separate video about them because this feels already a bit long, and if I start complaining about some of the books I DNF'd, there will be no end to that. And finally, I have also reread a whole bunch of books. See, this is my problem. This is why I feel like I don't read enough, because instead of reading new stuff, I just keep reading the books I already read. To be fair, some of these I read in like high school, so maybe they do classify as a new read. Others are just a comfort read. I literally read Lord of the Rings this year twice. All of Lord of the Rings, all over again. It's a book I read every freaking year. Anyway, the first book I reread was Snail on a Slope by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky. These two are considered like the pillars of Soviet sci-fi. They wrote a whole bunch of super popular books, including Roadside Picnic, which is the book that the movie Stalker is based on. I think there's also a video game called Stalker, isn't there? I'm not sure. Anyway, this is a really weird book. It's about this guy who works at a research facility studying the strange alien question mark forest, like it's never explained properly. Trying to describe the plot of this book is kind of pointless. It's just so strange. It has this fever dream quality to it. Nothing is really explained, and it just gets progressively weirder, and then it just ends. I'm pretty sure most of this book just went over my head. I think big chunks of it is just satire of like the Soviet bureaucracy or some other elements from that time period. Yeah, I feel like I just did not understand what the book was satirizing fully. Still, I really enjoyed it just because it was so strange. I have also reread Solaris by Stanislav Lem. It's a short old sci-fi I remember reading and liking as a teenager, and I'm pleased to say that I liked it the second time around as well. It's about a group of researchers on an alien planet who are trying to study this like vast living ocean. The writing is a bit dry, but it's super short, and the narrative also has that weird dreamlike vibe to it. But unlike Snail on a Slope, the weirdness in this book comes mostly from this alien ocean. And I just really enjoyed that, the sheer alienness of this planet. So often in modern sci-fi, aliens feel kind of like humans with different coat of paint. So I always enjoy alien life forms that are just like really weird and defy explanation. Next is Leviathan Wakes by James Corey. This is a fast-paced modern sci-fi where we follow two protagonists, a detective who tries to locate a missing daughter of a rich corporation owner, and an officer from a freighter ship who answers a distress call and then gets himself and his crew in like a whole bunch of trouble. All of this is set a few hundred years in the future where humans have colonized the solar system and the politics of the different factions in the solar system are like super messy and complicated. Okay, this was a very generic summary, but if I go into detail, we'd be here all day. Anyway, I really, really like this book. It's such a page turner. The world building is really detailed. The mystery elements in the book are so strong, and there are even like some horror vibes towards the second half of the book that are really, really good. I really liked it when I first read this, and on a second read, I still feel the same. It's just a really good sci-fi book. This is actually the first book of like a 9-book series. I've read 5 of them. I just kind of got tired of this world a little bit because I read them all in a row, but I do want to read the first 5 again and then keep going with the rest of the series and finish it eventually. And finally, the last book I'm going to mention is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. It was picked as Book of the Month for the book club, and I have read it in high school, but I remembered very little, so I thought I better read it again, just, before the book club so I could talk about it. And yeah, this was a fun little read. It's like an absurdist, humorous sci-fi about this guy who gets dragged into space by a friend of his who's an alien after Earth gets demolished by aliens in order to build like a galactic highway. And then these two just have a bunch of wacky adventures. And yeah, it's a really fun little read. Made me think a little bit of Terry Pratchett with his like humorous fantasy series in that it takes the world building into like a nonsensical fun territory. It does end very abruptly. I did not remember that when I read it for the first time because I had it originally as like one book because I think there's 5 books in this series. So I just had it as one volume and I just read them all the way through. But this book just came just the first book by its own. So when it ended, I was slightly confused. I was like, wait, that's how this ends? But yeah, it's a really fun book, and I don't have much to say about it. All right, I think that's gonna be it for my book wrap up. It's not a very impressive list, but it is more than I thought it'd be, since there were months where I have read absolutely nothing. So I'm kind of proud of myself. In terms of my favorite books this year, there wasn't really a huge standout like Children of Time, but I did have a lot of fun with Project Hail Mary, so I think I'd pick that as my favorite book of the year. It was a really enjoyable read. I also enjoyed Wheel of Time books a lot. The world was really interesting, as I've said, and I did like the characters quite a bit. But since it's like a start of the series, and I'm not sure how good the other books are, I'm not gonna, pick it as my top book or whatever. So, Project Hail Mary it is. So yeah, that'll be it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Happy New Year, everyone. And I'll see you all next year. Bye.